I think first is to remember that everybody is going to approach a problem differently. And so part of being a manager, the transition from being a doer to being a manager, is being able to communicate what needs to be done and not how it's going to be done. And recognizing that other people are going to approach things differently. And that doesn't mean they're always going to be right. It doesn't mean you can't give them improvements to how they do it. But you can't dictate how they're going to go about doing it. Otherwise, you're micromanaging. Whereas being a good manager is really about telling people, no, here's what we need you to go do. I can give you advice, I can help you, but I'm gonna let you go do it, and then I'm gonna take that and leverage it as we go forward. It is a big jump when you're transitioning from being a doer to being a manager. I think in careers, there are 3 transitions that people go through. You go from being a doer to being a manager, you go from being a manager to being a leader, and you go from being a leader at the end of your career to being an advisor. And those transitions are all really, really hard. Being a doer to being a manager, if you're a really good doer, giving that up and letting somebody else go do it, knowing that they're going to probably be less efficient than you are, they're not going to do it the way you would have done it, that does take a leap of faith. It does take an opportunity to step back and say, okay, let me see what they can do. And then you can guide and direct. And there's similar transitions as you go from manager to leader and leader to advisor. To really be a high-performing team, a high-performing organization, you need to get as many people delivering as much as they possibly can. And if you're dictating how it gets done, you're not spending time on other things. And the key is to elevate. In order to elevate, you have to actually leverage the people underneath you, which means you have to let them figure it out. So part of getting leverage out of your team is understanding what your team's really capable of. If you think about it in a sports context, you're not going to ask Tom Brady to block for the running back. That's not high leverage, right? Tom's many things, a good blocker, not one of them. So the same thing's true in a business context. You got to understand the capabilities of your team, and you're going to have people who are utility players, and you're going to have people who are specialty players. And to really leverage, you have to understand who the specialty players are. I had one guy on the next generation team who was really phenomenal at white space thinking. But in terms of team dynamics, he was a bit of a bull in a china shop. So we had to figure out how to craft a role so that he could be creative, inventive, visionary, and yet give some of that over when it was time to go execute, because translating that into the operational world, he was leaving effectively dead bodies in his wake, because he was just going for the execution of the vision that he had created. And so the leverage there was leveraging his capability and then organizationally buffering that with the other skills that were needed around it. One of the things I did throughout my career, I continue to do is, and it's obviously a little bit harder now in the COVID world, but you'd go and walk the floor and just go talk to people and see what they were working on. And not in a, hey, I'm your boss, I'm looking over your shoulder, what are you working on? But literally from an inquisitive, curious standpoint, what are you working on? And then engaging them in the conversation, making sure they understand how what they're working on in that moment fits back to the bigger picture. You have to start from a point of listening. One of the big transitions from manager to leader is a reduction in how much time you spend talking and how much time you spend listening is the increase. It's fascinating if you just stop talking, what you can start to absorb.